This is going to be our wrap-up session for this Outfielders series, and we're zoning into the inner circle. We've done middle circle first. That was about a month and a half ago, and then we did outer circle, and now inner circle. And Rob, what's the inner circle? I'll hand it over to you.
Okay. We're looking at, we've been trying to describe our Christian lives. And when we talk about the inner circle, we're talking about the individual, ourselves. And it starts with our relationship with God. So we talk about finding our own story. Often we talk about finding stories of ourselves. What are we up to? What are the stories we tell? But it's finding the stories of ourselves inside of God's story, you know. And really, it's when we come to learn about ourselves through what we know of God. We learn about our strengths. We learn about our weaknesses. We learn about the things that choke us, that trip us up. We learn about our passions and the things that we desire, the giftings that He's given us. And in some ways, from there, it springs into all these other parts of how we use all that individual journeying and learning to encourage others in the middle circle, and then to express those gifts in the outer world, or in that third circle of expressing it to make friends and talk to people about Jesus. So the inner circle is sort of where it starts. It's why we kind of make it like a concentric circle, and the idea that as we learn and grow, and as God works on us, we're able to move through those circles. And then a big word that we always talk about is integration. So it's never just linear one way, but it's flowing in and out of the different spheres of our lives, those different circles. But today we're going to focus on the inner circle. So we're talking really about us as individuals, knowing our stories, and maybe our story in relation to God's story, and how what He's revealed to us, what He's teaching us. What are some of the things that are making us flourish in our walk or in our lives, and what are the things that might be taking away our joy and choking us up at the moment?
If I look at that pointy end of things of where I'm at right now, my identity, I feel is it's a whole process over the lifetime I've lived, but definitely, and I think we all, have different expressions of our identity and realizations of who we are as we go through stages and we do different things. But for me, how it integrates is when I think everything I do comes out of this deeply ingrained, probably from early on in my young adult life, not even young adult, my adolescent life, of a deep sense of being loved and knowing Jesus as a very real person who really kind of stepped me through probably my biggest challenge at that young, tender age of sort of 14, 15, where I really invoked him into my life to rescue me from a really yucky situation with best friend and girls' schools and all that sort of rigmarole. For me at that time was very real, where my life kind of came apart from all that I knew with friendships and my popularity, all that sort of coming apart and being the reject in school and nobody wanting to be a friend or anything. And I just felt from that moment when my mum came beside me, as I was soaking my pillow in tears, not wanting to go to school for like weeks on those weeks. When she told me, "Why don't you ask Jesus to help you?" Um, that was probably my realest moment of knowing Jesus and understanding and seeing him, how he walked me through day by day in those moments and helped me through. And I feel like from that very real experience, I've just always had this sense of knowing I'm loved and knowing that what I do it actually doesn't matter. It actually is all about coming from that place of being loved. So yeah, that's I guess how it marries up, and it just means that I'm quite free to be who I am and not try to prove anything or not try to strive to set up my identity and let people know me in a certain way or this is who I am. I just kind of when you're loved by your parents, or when you felt a love that just undergirds everything that you are, I think it just, yeah, that's kind of my, um, probably my strongest sense of self, is through Jesus, and kind of reflects everything who I am from there. Yeah. I really, I've told my story a number of times, and I still get emotional thinking about it. And I think that's the key, is that I was at this place of vulnerability and absolute being humbled. It's almost like my life prior to that was, of um, what do you call it? Self confidence in myself. And so, with all popularity based, I was the larrikin. I had a best friend, and we just kind of did whatever we wanted. And I actually don't remember Jesus being relevant at all in that time. I went to church, I went to Sunday school, I learned all the stuff, but until I was in that place where I was on my knees and actually so lost that Jesus became real. I feel like now that I have children as well, and I see them in that same stage of life, I'm almost like, you know what, Lord, I don't pray for their lives to be easy and to go smooth. I pray that whatever challenges they face will bring them to a similar place, and that they will face challenges that cause their relationship with Jesus to be real. And yeah,
Great prayer.
Yeah.
Great prayer, Deb.
um, it's a big subject. I mean, talking about the next generation is a big
Yeah.
one as well. Like, what sort of um, what sort of almost cotton wooled life and environment are they growing up in, where they're
Yeah.
shielded from especially in our society here in Sydney, and schools and so forth, where we try to protect them from so much.
Yeah, I don't know if he's asking those questions necessarily like an introspective standpoint, but I can certainly see um, why identity um, has an impact on his reactions. So, for instance, if he's accused by his little sister of doing something, right, he gets indignant and so defensive. Um, and, she's the type that likes to just mess with him. Um, and clearly she's succeeding. And sometimes we have to tell him, it's like, just because someone says something doesn't mean that it is true, right? So it's like this, it's interesting because I mean, that's very much an identity thing, right? Somebody else is imprinting a adjective onto your identity. And if you don't like it, or if you're not secure in yourself enough to say like, oh, that's just simply not true,
Mm.
right? You have to react to it because you don't have a foundation from which to say, that's not me, right? Like if I say, Brandon is like this and stuff, and you're like, okay, but that's not. My name's Rowan. I'm not Brandon, right?
Mm.
You
Mm.
just shrug it off like you got the wrong number, right?
Mm.
I don't know who you're talking about. It's not me though,
Mm. Mm.
because this is who I am, right? And
Mm.
but without that foundation, right? Without that foundation, then you're really subject to so many external forces. And in this case, the younger sibling.
Yeah. And what about for you, Kins? And when was the last time you felt as though your identity was a big part of your conversations, um, like it was not necessarily called into question, but you had to go, you had to go that deep to engage.
um, I think so for myself. I worked at a family business for almost basically 2 decades, right? And I made the decision to leave. And when I made that decision to leave, I had to kind of take inventory of how much of my personal identity had got caught up in the idea of this enterprise, right? There was the the expectations of my parents, right? Um, as a son, there's the expectations of relatives who um, worked in the organization and other employees and my parents, the partners of my parents. Those expectations, there's things like that my friends and my wife, and so there are all these things that were kind of tied up in, and this is, I don't think this is like unique, it was just tied up in my career up to that point. And so when I left, I had to really observe and go through this process of I'm using the word judgment in the sense of saying like, okay, I'm gonna make a decision of like, uh, of was that helpful, right? Is that like legitimate? There were great things I learned from being part of that organization, and there were some like not so great things, and then and then um, some of it I'm trying to like, even to this day, just like wrestle with like, is that truly what I think, objectively, as objective as I can be, or is that something that's been imprinted on me, because that's what I was surrounded with.
And have you ever
So
had a comparative example, even ministry, growing up in church circles, not necessarily family and business, but was there anything that was akin to that experience as well? Did you grow up in church and a lot of your identity was wrapped up in that, and there was a process of finding yourself in that way?
um there was, I'm just trying, I mean, like, I would say similar to what Deb said. Like my clearest example is when I was in high school, and I don't know, I turned probably like 17 or 18 or something like that, and it was my birthday, and it was just, this was like not the worst birthday. I'm trying to not be like dramatic, but for me, as like a probably like uh hormone stricken teenager, it was it wasn't great, right?
Okay.
So it was like my friends were like busy. My parents forgot it was my birthday. They're like, okay, we'll get you a cake tomorrow. Um, there was just a couple of things like here and there that went, and I was like, oh wow, it's like I'm just kind of just here really by myself.
Mm,
And for whatever reasons, I was probably like particularly like vulnerable to this thought of like there's no one around, right?
mm, mm.
And and I I remember it wasn't like an audible voice, but there was the feeling of like Jesus kind of saying, "McKinson, I'm here.
Mm,
I haven't
mm.
left." And that struck me. Um, that struck me like almost viscerally, right? In the sense that the I don't describe it. It's like, I would say it's like the difference between like hearing a sermon and knowing you're hearing a message and then knowing a message, right?
Mm,
Like I've
mm,
heard the message of, oh, it's like, this Christianity is relational,